So welcome to Zoom Talk.
Hey.
Hi.
So my name is Avani Alexander, and I am the youth coordinator at United Against Human Trafficking.
Hi, everybody. My name is Sarah Jane, and I am the education specialist at United Against Human Trafficking.
My name is Eleanor Polo, and I'm the outreach coordinator.
My name is Brianna Acosta, and I'm an outreach specialist at United Against Human Trafficking.
Hi, I'm Samantha Ledesma, and I'm also an outreach specialist at UHT.
Hi, I'm Taylor, and I'm a program specialist at UAHT.
So today our goal was to just have an open conversation about case studies that we have worked on to give different perspectives of human trafficking, whether that be sex trafficking, labor trafficking, working with youth, outreach, and education. So one case that I want to talk about first happens to be a case where a 17-year-old girl was trafficked through her high school. What happened within this case was I was working with her within a residential facility because her mother ended up giving away her rights as a parent because she was afraid for her child's safety. During the situation, we were doing a youth prevention program. We were talking about different things as it pertains to human trafficking. And basically within this case, she was saying, hey, this has happened to me. So she was 17, female. She wasn't afraid to tell her story, which was eye-opening for me doing that presentation. But long story short, she basically said that she had got sex trafficked through her high school, and there was a male who actually pretended to be a student. Okay, with this case, what happened was he was actually 28 years old. He was nowhere near, 17, 18, 15, 16 high school student age. So what happened was she told me that she told the school what happened. They were afraid to say something about it. They were kind of not open to what she wanted to do as far as the case went. So within this, she ended up trying to get police help, things like that. And long story short, she ended up telling her mother. After she told her mother said, hey, we need to go to the police station. We need to talk to the school, get help within that. No one was able to help her at that time. So within this trafficking situation, the male, he basically coerced her. He was saying, hey, I care about you. I love you, making her feel like he wanted to be in a relationship with her. So she felt like she needed to trust him within this situation. So he was making her do things that she did not want to do. He was basically saying, hey, if you don't do these things for me, whether it be sell your body or sell drugs for me, I'll hurt your mother because I know she has disabilities. Okay, so he was basically coercing her to do things that she didn't want to do. So after I met her within this program, she told me all of these different things. Her mom also ended up reaching out to us and telling us everything that happened within this case as well. After that, we talked to her mom, we got her resources, and we were able to say, hey, okay, we need to kind of dig further into this situation because it seems like she hasn't gotten the help that she needed. With the mother giving away her rights, that was basically saying right there, I'm afraid for my child's safety. So after that, she got the resources that she needed within this residential facility through our organization, and she ended up turning 18, and she was able to get out of that situation. So that's just one of the many cases that we have, worked on, and that's through a high school. A lot of times we know that kids tend to be in school all day, but sometimes we don't think about, well, this can happen to my child in school. So with that case, we just kind of want to make sure that we continue to do those prevention programs, the youth programs, making sure that we give out the proper resources so that we can continue to spread the word and make sure that things like this don't tend to happen. So does anyone else have like a similar case or something to talk about?
Yeah, I have another case. It's actually not similar at all to that case, but it was pretty interesting. It was actually when I was first starting in my role as the education specialist, and my role, I don't work as directly with people as the other coworkers that I'm with today, but I about human trafficking, what it is, how it happens. And so I was doing a presentation and talking about traveling sales crews. And somebody got up in the middle of the presentation and said, this happened to me. I had no idea that I was trafficked. And so
I love your little cat in the background.
Yeah, that's my cat. So I spoke with her after the presentation to find out a little bit more about what happened. And she said that she had been involved in a traveling sales crew for 10 years. And she had an intimate partner that was one of the recruiters of the sales crew. So anytime she tried to leave, there would be this intimidation by her partner, who was one of the recruiters. She would get beat up, physically assaulted by the recruiters and the other crew members if she tried to leave. And she said that she was still owed like tens of thousands of dollars. So I did a little bit of research on it, and Polaris Project, which if anyone isn't familiar, there's a national human trafficking hotline, 1-888-373-7888, and it's the United States hotline. So anybody who is a victim of human trafficking or suspects human trafficking can call this hotline. So they collect data about the calls that they get, and they found that in between 2008 and 2015, they received about 400 calls related to traveling sales crews, more than any other labor trafficking case except for domestic work. So what happens a lot of times is traveling sales crews will have really aggressive recruiting, and they'll advertise like a party lifestyle, make a lot of money, travel the country, make new friends, and no experience necessary. So a lot of people who are minors or who are foreign nationals looking like kind of desperate for work, this seems like a great opportunity for them. And then once they are part of this traveling sales crew, there are these aggressive methods that are within the place. We've heard stories about drug abuse, partying, physical assault, sexual assault, and people can be trafficked anywhere from a week. We've had cases where like high schoolers were trafficked in a traveling sales crew over their spring break. And then this woman was involved for 10 years. So yeah, and this woman didn't even realize that she had been trafficked. So I followed up with her, and we touched base with her and got her some resources to help her. This had happened a long time ago, so she was in a different place now. But yeah, it was really interesting to find out more about traveling sales crews and the fact that a lot of people might not even know that they're being trafficked.
Thanks, Sarah.
I will go ahead and share a case study that I was working on. So it all started with a friend of mine who lives in Austin knows the school counselor here in Houston. And the counselor thought that there was something going on with one of her students. And so my friend gave her my contact info and was like, hey, Eleanor works in human trafficking. She might be able to talk you through this a little bit. So she was a middle school counselor, and she said that one of her students had been making some pretty drastic changes in the way she was talking. She was having long stints of absences that were super random, and her hygiene had gone down a lot. Like, she wasn't showering, her clothes were dirty, and so the student talked to her and said basically that she'd been going to a lot of Instagram parties, which I had never heard of before, but apparently what traffickers will do is start following young girls on Instagram and say, hey, we're having this really cool party, but you have to follow this amount of people, these certain people, you have to have this amount of followers, but it's like super elite. And once this happens, you can come to our party. And so it turns out that it was several gang members who were traffickers, and they would have girls to this party, and it was basically where they could recruit. So this young girl was recruited by a gang member, and so she was being sold in exchange, not for money, but for a place to sleep, food, which she couldn't really get at home. And so it turns out that like several of her friends were also being recruited by the same gang members. And then from there, of course, videos were circulating of her like doing certain things, and she was scared to go back to school, so she ran away. And her counselor was like pretty much the only adult figure she trusted. So she was able to open up to her counselor about all of this. We were able to run what's called the See It tool to see if she shows like a clear concern of trafficking or low concern for trafficking. And we were able to connect her to all the resources she needed. She was able to get medical help. She was able to do a forensic interview, and she was able to get the help she needed. But it was really interesting because we know that gang trafficking is really prevalent, but it's really, really difficult because it's so protected. And that was really interesting. Also, the use of social media and the Instagram parties, which I just never heard of, I'm sure is like really common. And yeah. So that was like, it was really interesting. And this girl had like so much, like, it seemed like everything was like an uphill battle, but I'm so glad that she was able to like get all the help she needed.
Good.
Wow. That's crazy.
As a program specialist, a lot of the work that I do is focused on some of the younger populations that we work with. So I want to talk about like a couple of cases that I got to kind of handle. One of them is a lot shorter because so basically there was a young man who was in one of my programs, and he had been trafficked at a very young age by an immediate family member. And so I don't have a lot of information on the case. The youth was only in my program for like 2 or 3 sessions, was not very engaged, didn't say a lot. I tried to sort of talk with him after a couple of times, and didn't really want to participate in those conversations, which is totally okay. And then stopped coming to programs. So I mean, I'm not really sure what happened, but that was my first interaction with a male victim of sex trafficking, which was really eye-opening for me. But I guess a case where there was a lot more going on was there's a youth that was in one of the juvenile justice centers that we go and facilitate programming in. And she had been trafficked by several individuals, a couple of which she referred to as like boyfriends or boyfriend. And the thing about this situation is this youth had so many different adversities that she was experiencing all at one time. So there was her trafficking situation. At the time where I started engaging with her, she was experiencing some pretty severe substance dependency issues. She was dealing with some grief. An immediate family member had just passed away, and she was also like currently in JJ juvenile justice. So like those are all very huge stressors, especially for a young person. And I think it's a really good example of how a lot of times human trafficking is a lot more than just human trafficking. There are a lot of other barriers and issues that victims face. And if you reduce it down to just human trafficking, then you don't really see how these situations start to happen, and you don't always recognize how to really help someone and pull them out of that situation as a social service provider.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that, Taylor. The case that most came to mind when y'all were talking was one that involved a foreign national. So this case really kind of shed light on how important it is to have outreach, not just in English, but also other languages. Specifically, this person spoke Spanish, and they called our hotline. So that just goes to show that, whoever had our hotline and had contact with this individual was able to, facilitate that access and get her some help. So she actually called saying that she had been she had basically come to the United States without papers, so illegally. So she was undocumented when she got here, and she ended up meeting not her coyote, which is, you know, what they call the people that help them come into the country illegally, but it was a different one that she had met, and that person was one of her multiple traffickers. They sex trafficked her in the South, but in multiple states. When we were talking more kind of in depth about that period of her life, I remember she very explicitly stated, I don't remember a whole lot, or that whole part of my life is like a blur to me, just because of all the trauma that I had experienced. And I think that's an important point for us to remember about all victims of any kind of trauma, but especially human trafficking. Oftentimes, their ability to even recount their story is affected by the actual trauma that they went through. So I think that kind of sometimes also impedes maybe investigations into their stories and stuff like that. But after that point, she said that eventually she was able to escape, and she made her way to the Houston area, where she, you know, started making a new life for herself. During that period, she was able to get a T visa, which is a visa specifically for foreign nationals who have experienced human trafficking. And so that enabled her to gain some sort of legal status here in the United States. And so she was doing pretty well. And I guess just fate had it that she ran into one of her traffickers here in the Houston area, seemingly by accident or coincidence, although I kind of have a feeling that maybe he had a way of keeping track of her or something like that. And so he basically forced her into another trafficking situation. However, this time it was sex trafficking and labor trafficking. And the labor that she was forced to do, her job was to go to the border and pick up other undocumented immigrants who were trying to make their way to Houston. So her job was to drive them from the border to the Houston area. So in this situation, there was, throughout her trafficking experiences, I would say, but particularly during the period that was most recent when she called me, it was very violent. Lots of sexual assault, physical assault of herself and even her family members as ways to intimidate and coerce her and to kind of keep her in that situation. Lots of threats to do that, especially if she were to try and get help, if she were to contact law enforcement, or really anything like that. She was also forced to make certain transactions with money that she didn't know where it came from. She didn't know what its purpose was going to serve, but she was forced to participate in that a lot. And then after this point, she was understandably very scared to make any kind of formal report. So really, she just wanted to talk to me about it and kind of get my advice, especially since he still had her phone number, was still trying to contact her, force her to do things. However, a couple weeks prior, she told me that she had stopped responding to him, and she had actually had to move from where she was previously living so that he couldn't find her anymore. So since that point, I had basically checked up on her several times to see like if she needed anything, what resources. When she called me originally, it was very clear that she was still suffering from PTSD and stuff like that. So I connected her to therapy resources, even though she was already connected to, the organization that had helped her with the T visa. But she definitely was very grateful for that help, and also requested my help with some legal issues that came up because of her trafficking situation due to the money and other things that happened during it. So I think this case is really important because it just goes to show that just because, let's say, someone is trafficked and then successfully seeks legal remedies and gets out of the situation doesn't mean that they're not going to be trafficked again. It's actually really likely for victims of human trafficking to experience re-victimization, as well as poly-victimization. I mean, she suffered so many other different types of traumas other than just human trafficking. Rape, sexual assault, physical assault, all of that. So I think that's important for us to keep in mind, that it's not, escaping is not an event, it's a process. And being able to heal is also a process. And then this one was also interesting because she was obviously trafficked for both labor and sex, which is totally possible and does happen. So that's just one that I thought would be good for people to hear, to kind of see kind of the full range of what human trafficking can look like. And then finally, she was actually also, excuse me, she was actually also a victim of a trafficker. One of her traffickers, the one that trafficked her the second time, he had a second victim that also contacted us. So the last thing about this case was that it was very clear that, these, at least in her case, it was the whole network of human traffickers that really connected with each other and trafficked multiple people who didn't even know each other in various places here in the United States and in other countries. So I think that's important to remember as well.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And I really like what you said about it not being an event. It's the whole process. And I think people don't totally realize that. They think like once you're out, like, oh, you're out, now you'll be fine. But that's like not true at all. And with poly-victimization, there's so many things that can come from that one type of victimization that might make you more vulnerable to other types. And so Samantha, you are our newest member of UAHT, and pretty much once you started, we started working from home. Right. So you might not have like the same kinds of stories we do, but we'd love to hear just like how your perspective has changed on human trafficking since you started.
I think the biggest thing that you guys kind of touched up on is that I think before working with UHT, I thought it was very black and white. I thought being a victim meant knowing that you were a victim and being in that scenario because you were being physically restrained. And I think now it's a lot more clear for me to see that a victim might not even be able to self-identify and to know that they are in that situation just because different factors, maybe the fact that your trafficker is someone that you know, someone that you trust, it makes it very hard to believe that you could be in that sort of scenario. But also just, it could be the culture or like a cycle of abuse that makes that behavior very normalized. And so that for sure has been a huge perspective change, but also, as I heard from your stories, scenarios tend to be so much more complex than just, hey, someone's being physically restrained. It can be trauma that keeps a person in that situation, or keeps them like in that cycle of going back, or just like substance use or plain survival. So I think that's what I have taken from this, that it's a lot more than just this is wrong and this person is seeking help. Sometimes we have to empower the victim to know that they are a victim and that they want help.
Thank you, Samantha, and thank y'all for sharing your stories, because I mean, we've talked about it, but I've never heard in depth, I think, every story, and I think it's good just for people to hear the different perspectives, whether it be in the school or gang trafficking or labor trafficking or with the mail, through education. And I just want to leave with the point that for anyone that's watching or for anyone that's listening, if you guys have any topics that you want to hear us talk about, please feel free to just comment in the boxes that are whether on YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, and let us know, because we want to keep these conversations going. And thank you guys for watching. Thank you guys for listening. And thank you to my coworkers for participating. Until next time.
Thank you for organizing this, Bonnie.
Of course.